Okay, in this week's Photoshop assignment, we're going to learn how to take photographs that are not very good in quality and change them so they look a lot better. This photograph is a good example. It's very large. If I zoom into full size, you'll see that it really is very, very big. It's too big to fit on my screen. You'll notice that the picture is very dark also. Now, the one part of the picture that is not dark, the screen right here, the TV screen, that's going to cause a problem if we try to fix the picture. But there's a lot of detail in this picture that you can get out. We're going to learn how to do that. Now, the last thing is that the image is a little bit tilted down to the left, and we're getting a lot of the ceiling here, which maybe we don't want to get. So what we're going to do this week is that we're going to take this photograph and we're going to change it into this photograph. You can see that this is much improved. You get a lot more detail, you can see a lot more of the people, but the bingo screen is not way too bright. So I'm going to show you how to take a picture like this, how to crop it so you get only the part that you want, how to reduce it in size so it's better to send by email, and how to correct the color and brightness so that everything looks much better than the original. I'm going to close this window now and close this one, and let's go to our desktop. Now on the desktop, hopefully you have downloaded the photograph that I made available to you, this one right here. You'll notice that this file is rather large. The dimensions are 3,264 pixels by 2448, and the size of the photograph is more than 1 megabyte. So we're going to fix that. In the final image that we have, I named mine Welcome Party Retouched. You'll notice that now the dimensions are much smaller, about 1,200 by 600 pixels, and the size is cut by quite a bit. It's now only 643 kilobytes. We can get it even smaller than that, as a matter of fact. So the first step is to open up Photoshop, go to the File menu, say Open, and then find the Welcome Party image on your desktop or wherever you put it, and then open that. So here's the picture. Now, the first thing that you might want to notice is that it's a really big picture. If you go to the View menu and you say Actual Pixels, this is Control-1 on your keyboard, you'll notice that it's a really, really big picture. You'll notice that it's very dark. You can kind of see some people here, but it's kind of hard to make out faces for a lot of people here. But it's a very, very large picture. You want to make it smaller so that you can share it and people will be able to see it more easily. Alright, so the first thing we want to do, however, is we want to repair the picture. It's way too dark. We've got to make it look a lot better. Now, I want to make it fit inside my screen again, so I'm going to do Control-0. That's also in the View menu. Control-0 is right here. It's Fit on Screen, and that means that the picture will fit entirely in your window here. We zoomed out. Right now it's about 35% of its total size, but now we can get a better look at it and we can do things to fix it. Now, how do you fix the picture? It's really dark right now. How do you make it look a lot better? Well, one thing that you can do is that you can go up to the Image menu, and there you've got a lot of things, but one thing you want to do is go to Adjustments. And under Adjustments, you'll find a lot of different features that we can use. One thing that you can do is try to change the brightness and contrast. That seems like a natural thing to do. You can change the exposure. This is for photographs that were taken which were too dark or too light. And if neither of those work, down here there's another one called Shadows and Highlights. Later on we'll be taking a look at color balance and hue and saturation, but first let's take a look at brightness and contrast. If you open up brightness and contrast, you'll see that you've got two sliders. One for the brightness, that makes it a lot darker or a lot brighter. Now notice I've made it as bright as I can, and you'll see that a lot of detail has come out. There's a lot of hidden detail in any photograph that you take. The colors are a little bit too deep, however. The lights are too light and the darks are too dark, so I'm going to take the contrast and make it go down. That'll make it a little bit more balanced, but you'll notice now that the LCJ bingo screen is really washed out. It does not look good at all. In the original image, you can see it looks much better, but if we just do brightness and contrast, we can improve the overall image, but the bright part of the image really comes out badly. So we're going to cancel that, and we're not going to use that one, at least not yet. Let's go back to Image, and again to Adjustments, and this time let's try Exposure. Once again, this is for images that were taken which are too bright or too dark. So if we take the exposure, and of course if you see we go down, that just makes it terrible. But if we go up, you'll see that again we can bring out some of the detail. But if you take a look at the LCJ bingo screen, it's even worse than before. And if you go too high, well, that's just terrible. We can't have that. So this doesn't work either. So I'm going to say cancel on that one. There is a third choice, however. In the Image menu, when you go to Adjustments, there's one called Shadows and Highlights. This is really what's best for our situation. If you go to Shadows and Highlights, you'll get two basic controls. One of them is for shadows. That means you can make the dark areas lighter, and the other is for highlights, where you can make the bright areas darker. Now what's magical about this is that the shadows, if you make the shadows lighter, you'll notice the bright areas don't change. This only changes the dark areas of your screen, and the bright areas don't change at all. Similarly, in the highlights area, you can make only the bright parts darker or more contrasty, and it doesn't affect any of the dark parts. So we're going to change the amount here to about 50%. I believe that's a fairly good balance here. It's not perfect yet, but we'll improve it a little bit more later. And probably there's not much you can do here to improve the bright areas. We're just going to make that 10%. So with making the shadows 50% and the highlights 10%, you're able to get a more balanced photograph. Again, this is not perfect yet, but you're on your way to getting a much better photograph. Now we can come back in and try some of the previous ones. We can go to Adjustments, and we can go to Brightness Contrast again. This time we're not going to change it so much. We're just going to kind of goose it a little bit. Let's put this up by about 20%, and you'll see that there's kind of a nice improvement there. If I take away the preview, you can see it's a slight change, but it's a fairly nice one. If I bring the contrast down by a similar amount, you'll see that that takes away some of the colors which are too deep. Again, before and after. Before and after. So by using this just a little bit, we can goose it up a little bit. We can make it a little bit better than it was before. And so now I'm going to say OK, and now the picture is improved that way. Now you might want to think about changing the colors. This image looks a little bit too red, or perhaps too yellow in some places. It looks like we could correct the colors a little bit, and that happens quite a bit when you have photographs which are underexposed. The colors don't come out very well. So we're going to go again to Image and Adjustments, but this time we're going to go into what's called Color Balance. This allows you to control each of the three basic colors in your photograph, being red, green, and blue. You can change the brighter colors, the middle colors, or the darker colors. Changing the darker colors tends to make a big difference, and maybe not so good of one. It makes big changes in the way things look. But going to the highlights and the midtones probably has a better effect. Now this photograph is a little bit too red for me, so I'm going to go away from the red and towards the cyan a bit, and you'll see that it's a very subtle change, but it does change things a little bit for the better. I'm going to try going a little bit more to the blue, and I'm going to go maybe plus 10 here. So I've got minus 15 on the red, plus 10 on the blue. Again, if I turn off the preview, you can see before and after. It's a slight change, but after a lot of slight changes, the picture might look a lot better. So I'm going to say OK. So that's another way that you can improve the picture. Now, if I go back to the original, you can see there's a huge difference. This is the original. This is after shadows and highlights, after brightness and contrast, and after the color balance. So now we've got from this photo to that photo, and suddenly this is really, really improved over what it used to be. So those are some basic ways that you can retouch the appearance in terms of brightness, contrast, and color balance to make the photograph look a lot better than it did when you first took it. But now we have another couple of problems. One of those is that the photograph is off balance. You'll notice that on the left side it's a little bit down, and on the right side it's a little bit up. If you make the ruler if you turn on the ruler by doing Control R, or I believe you can go to the View menu here and you can go to Rulers right there, then if you click on the ruler, click and drag down, you can drag down what's called a guide, and this gives you a horizontal line that you can then use to see how level things are in your image. Here you can see that my line hits where the wall meets the ceiling, but over on the right side you'll see that there's a big gap between there. So obviously I'm going to want to change that. In order to get rid of this line, you just have to click on it again and bring it up to the ruler, and when you let go, now that guide is gone. So how can I fix this? Well, the way to do it is to crop your image. To crop your image, you want to go to the tools over here on the left, and you'll notice that one of the buttons looks like, well, it's hard to explain what that is, but that's the crop button, the crop tool. If you click on that, suddenly you'll see that there is an outline around the edge. You'll notice that if you click outside of the image, that a grid appears, and it allows you to see how things are balanced. If you click on the outside of the image, not inside, but outside, then you'll notice that you can now rotate the photograph. And you can make it so that the line between the wall and the ceiling is a lot more level. It automatically crops at the corners here, but you might want to crop some more because there's a lot of ceiling in this picture. I don't want all of that ceiling. So where you see a crop mark on the edge or here at the top or the sides, you can click, drag down, and it will cut out that part of the image. Maybe you don't want this person's head at the bottom, so you might want to crop that out as well. And now you've got pretty much what you want. In order to see what it looks like, you can hit the Enter key. So now it has been changed and cropped in a way that's easier to look at. So that looks a lot better, doesn't it? We're still in cropping mode, so you'll want to click on a different button like this Move button. And when you do that, now the cropping is finished. I'm going to take away the ruler so it's a little bit more of a clear view here. And here you can see the picture looks a lot better. Now you might still think it's too dark or there's too much color, so you can adjust again to your tastes. But I kind of like where it is right now. I think it's okay. I might, for example, want to get the screen a little bit lower. One other way to do that would be to select it, like we selected Punta last week, and I can select only the screen and not anything around it. I might want to feather it a little bit in order to make it so it's not so sharp. This is under, it's under Select and Modify and Feather. This is not necessary, but I like to do this. I'll give it a feather of about 3 pixels. That should be enough to give it a nice soft edge. And now I can control the brightness and contrast just for that part of the image. So I can bring the brightness down on that if I want, and bring the contrast down. So it's a little bit more controllable. It's not quite so bright compared to everything else. There we go. And I'll say OK. You might notice it's still very, very green. It's a really, really bright color next to everything else. So one other thing I can do is I can go into the Image menu. I can go to Adjustments. And on this time I can go to Hue and Saturation. This is Control U on the keyboard. And here, in the area that I've selected, I can bring down the power or the brightness of a color. So I can make it black and white, or I can really amp it up, or I can just bring it down enough so that it's not quite so bright as it was before. I'm going to try -15. There we go. And then click OK. And now it looks even better than before. I'm going to deselect by doing Control D. And now the picture looks a lot more balanced, doesn't it? So since I cropped, this is the improvement that I've made. I've improved the screen right there. And again, from the beginning, I've made it a lot better than it was. This is the beginning of the picture, and this is where we have it right now. It's still too big, however. Notice if I go full size, it's way too big still for the computer screen. I'm going to do Control 0, so it fits in the screen now. So how do we change the size? Well, once again, we go to the Image menu. We go to Image Size, and now we can see that the image size is 3079 pixels by 1707. That's way too big. So I'm going to change it to 1200 pixels. That turns out for me to be 665 in height. Your picture might be a little bit different because you might have cropped it differently. You can change the size. For example, if I want to go 1500 pixels, I get 832. Or maybe I want to set the height to 800. That gives me 1443. You can set whatever you want, but for this exercise, let's try 1200. And let's say OK. All right, so now it looks small, but that's because we're still zoomed out. We're at 42%. So do a Control 1, and now this is the actual size of the image. The quality, or at least the sharpness, is actually improved a little bit because we decrease the size of the image. So it actually improves the quality, or the apparent quality, just a little bit. So you can see now, of course, it's looking tons better than it was when we started, and now we're ready to save it. There's a couple different ways you can save it. First of all, you can save, and that will erase the original image. So if you want to keep the original image, you don't want to do save. If you do save as, then you can save it under a new name. But to make the image as small as possible, you might want to do a save for web. This gives you a great deal of control over how the image is saved. This brings up a large dialog box, and it has many parts to it. You can ignore most of them, but one thing you'll want to take a look at is what type of image it is, the quality of the image, and then the size of the image. Notice that right now it's at 167 kilobytes. That's a lot smaller than it was originally. Remember, the original size was 1.2 megabytes. This is about 1/8 or 1/9 of the original size. Now, why is it so small? Well, one reason is because we made the image smaller, but another reason is because we're doing something called compression. Now, if we make the quality better, 100%, then the picture size is going to increase. We get 635 kilobytes. This gives you a perfect picture, but is also much, much bigger. If we change the quality to 0, then it really makes it much smaller. Now it's only 29 kilobytes, but you'll notice that the quality of the image has suddenly become really awful. You get all of these big squares in there, and everything looks like it's got lines around it. It just looks terrible. So if I bring the quality back up to 100, you can see now the quality of the image is greatly improved. Back down to 0, it's terrible. So we want to find a balance. If you put it at about 60%, that's usually a fairly good balance. You can see a little bit of garbage, of strange stuff in here. This is called artifaction. You can see a little bit of that, but if you zoom out, you don't notice it too much. I'll try to go to 100% and then back down to 60, and you'll see a little bit of difference in the quality. If I go up to 70%, I get a little bit better. 80% probably gives me very close to perfect quality. So here's what it looks like right now. And if I bring it up to 100%, you might not see very much of a difference. So probably for this picture, 80% is maybe a good compromise. If I bring it up to 80%, then the size is about 300 kilobytes. And that's still a big savings in size from your original image. So I've got it down to 80%. It's a JPEG picture, which is good. A GIF or a PNG, those are going to be way bigger. So JPEG is probably your best image type. And now I'm ready to go. I'm going to save it down here. I'm going to call it Welcome Party. Well, actually, because I'd like to get your names on this, let's put your name at the beginning. Luis Poza, Welcome Party in this case. In your case, you put your name before Welcome Party. Save it to your desktop. And now you'll be able to see that image. I've got mine right here. So here's my original. You can see that it's 1.12 megabytes. It's really big in dimensions. Here's my retouched version, and it looks a lot better. It's 1,200 pixels by 665, and it's only 300 kilobytes, which means that it's a lot easier to send by email or post to a website. So this is what you should have at the end of your exercise. As usual, I'll give you a sheet of instructions to get to this point, but basically, this is how you might retouch a photograph which is too dark. You'll probably want to open up a lot of various photographs that you have and then try using those commands to help improve the image. Once again, you go to Image and then Adjustments. You can try Brightness and Contrast, Exposure, Hue and Saturation to make the colors a little bit more bright or less bright, Color Balance to change the reds, the blues, the greens, and then Shadows and Highlights if you've got a picture with some areas which are too bright and some areas which are too dark. All right, that's it for this week. This is the picture that you should be giving me.